Welcome to Somnus Sagas, dear listeners, to another journey through the mists of time. Tonight, we travel together to the warm, humid lands of ancient Mesoamerica, where the Maya people built their great cities among the jungle vines and towering cecropia trees. As you settle into your comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow and deepen, matching the gentle rhythm of rain falling on broad tropical leaves. The Maya civilization stretched across what we now call Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. For over 3,000 years, their people lived, worked, and dreamed beneath the same stars you see tonight. Their days began with the soft pre-dawn light filtering through the forest canopy, just as your day is now ending in peaceful darkness. Tonight, we will walk slowly through their world, observing their daily routines, their quiet moments of contemplation, and their gradual development across centuries. Like the steady growth of a mahogany tree in the rainforest, their civilization expanded ring by ring, year by year, generation by generation. Let your mind settle into this ancient rhythm as we begin our gentle exploration. The morning mist rises from the jungle floor, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and flowering vines. In this misty dawn of history, we find the earliest Maya people, living simple lives in small villages, clearing small patches of forest to plant their corn, beans, and squash. Their days were governed by the sun's path across the sky, the phases of the moon, and the reliable return of the rainy season. In the quiet hours before sunrise, around 2000 BCE, the first Maya families were already stirring in their simple thatched homes. The morning air was cool and still, broken only by the distant calls of howler monkeys and the gentle rustling of leaves in the forest breeze. These early people lived much as their ancestors had for generations, waking with the first light, tending their crops, and gathering wild foods from the abundant forest around them. Their daily routine was as regular and comforting as the rhythm of your own breathing. Each morning, the women would rise first, quietly stoking the embers of their cooking fires back to life. The soft crackling of dry wood and the gradual bloom of warm light created a peaceful atmosphere that would carry through the day. They would grind corn on their stone metates, the repetitive scraping motion producing the fine masa that would become their tortillas. This grinding motion continued for hours each day, a meditative rhythm that connected them to their mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers, stretching back through countless generations. The men would prepare their tools for the day's work, sharpening their stone axes and checking their planting sticks. Their movements were unhurried and methodical, each task completed with the patience born of centuries of practice. They would clear small sections of forest using the slash and burn technique their ancestors had perfected. First came the careful selection of the area, walking slowly through the trees, observing the soil, the slope of the land, the direction of water flow. Then the gradual cutting of smaller trees and brush, allowing them to dry in the tropical sun for several months. The larger trees would be girdled, their bark stripped in a careful ring, allowing them to die slowly and naturally. When the dry season arrived, they would set controlled fires that burned slowly and evenly across their cleared plots. The ash would settle into the rich, dark soil, providing nutrients for their crops. The smell of wood smoke would hang in the still air for days, a gentle haze that softened the harsh tropical sunlight and created a dreamlike atmosphere in the forest clearings. Their farming was a dance of cooperation with the natural world. They planted corn in small mounds, with beans climbing the stalks and squash spreading between the rows. This combination, which they called the Three Sisters, provided complete nutrition, while each plant helped the others grow. The corn provided support for the beans. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil for the corn and squash, and the broad squash leaves shaded the soil to retain moisture and prevent weeds. It was a perfect system, developed through generations of careful observation and gentle experimentation. Children learned these patterns by watching and helping, their small hands learning to plant seeds at just the right depth, to tend the young plants with care, to recognize the signs that told when crops were ready to harvest. The knowledge passed from parent to child like a quiet conversation, unhurried and natural, part of the gentle flow of daily life. In the evenings, families would gather around their cooking fires as the last light faded from the western sky. The day's work was done. The corn was stored. The tools were clean and ready for tomorrow. They would share simple meals of tortillas, beans, and vegetables, perhaps fish caught in nearby streams or small game hunted in the forest. Their conversations were soft and comfortable, discussing the weather, the growth of their crops, plans for tomorrow's tasks. Children would listen to stories told by their elders, tales passed down through generations about their ancestors, about the forest spirits, about the movements of the stars overhead. As the centuries passed slowly by, like a river flowing gently toward the sea, these small farming communities began to grow. Villages became larger, with more families clearing more land, building more houses, developing more sophisticated ways of life. Some families became skilled at making pottery, creating beautiful ceramic vessels for cooking and storage. Others learned to work obsidian, the volcanic glass that could be shaped into sharp tools and beautiful ornaments. Still others became experts at weaving, creating intricate textiles from cotton and other plant fibers. Trade routes developed gradually, like footpaths worn deeper by countless journeys. Villages began to specialize in different products, trading their surplus for goods they couldn't produce locally. Coastal communities gathered salt from tidal pools and traded it inland for obsidian tools and jade ornaments. Highland communities quarried grinding stones and traded them to lowland villages for cacao and colorful feathers. Each trade journey was a slow, peaceful undertaking, with merchants walking for days along jungle paths, stopping at friendly villages, sharing news and stories along with their goods. The population grew slowly but steadily, new villages spreading through the forest clearings like ripples spreading across a quiet pond. By 1000 BCE, Maya communities dotted the landscape across a vast area of Mesoamerica. Each village was unique, yet all shared the same basic patterns of life: corn farming, forest management, pottery making, textile production, and the gradual development of increasingly sophisticated social structures. During this time, the Maya began to develop their distinctive architectural style. Early public buildings were simple structures with thatched roofs, but gradually, some communities began experimenting with stone construction. They learned to cut and shape limestone blocks, fitting them together without mortar to create strong, durable walls. These early stone buildings were modest affairs, perhaps a single room where community leaders could meet, or where religious ceremonies could be held during the rainy season. The development of their writing system began during this period as well, growing slowly and naturally from their need to keep track of trade goods, agricultural cycles, and important community events. Early Maya writing was simple and practical, using pictures and symbols to represent concrete objects and actions. A picture of corn might represent the grain itself, or the planting season, or the goddess who protected the harvest. Over time, these pictures became more stylized and abstract, developing into the sophisticated hieroglyphic system that would eventually record their history, their scientific observations, and their complex religious beliefs. As the morning mist gradually lifts from a peaceful valley, revealing the landscape beneath, so too did Maya. Civilization slowly revealed its growing complexity during the pre-classic period, from about 2000 BCE to 250 CE. The small farming villages of earlier centuries began to grow into larger communities, and some of these communities began to develop into what we would recognize as true cities. The process was gradual and organic, like the growth of a great tree from a small seed. Families who were particularly skilled at farming, or trading, or crafting, began to accumulate surplus wealth. They could feed more people, support more children, and attract relatives and friends to join their communities. Successful villages grew larger, and larger communities could undertake more ambitious projects. One of the earliest of these growing centers was Nakbe, located in what is now northern Guatemala. Walking through the forest today, you can still see the massive stone platforms that once supported wooden temples and palaces. But in its time of growth, around 1000 BCE, Nakbe must have been a bustling community, with hundreds of people going about their daily routines in an increasingly complex society. The daily life in these early cities maintained the same peaceful rhythm as the smaller villages, but with greater variety and specialization. In the early morning hours, before the sun climbed high enough to make work uncomfortable, laborers would gather at construction sites to continue work on the great stone platforms and pyramids that were beginning to define the Maya architectural style. These workers were not slaves driven by harsh overseers, but community members contributing their labor during the agricultural off-season, when their fields needed less attention. The construction process was meditative in its repetition. Quarry workers would carefully split limestone blocks from bedrock, using wooden wedges and stone hammers. The steady rhythm of their work, tap, 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 would echo through the quarries from dawn until the heat of midday made the work too difficult to continue. The limestone split cleanly along natural fracture lines, producing blocks that were surprisingly uniform in size and shape. Teams of workers would then transport these blocks to construction sites using log rollers and rope and lever systems. The work was slow but steady, with each block carefully positioned and checked for level and alignment. Master builders would oversee the work, ensuring that each course of stones was perfectly horizontal and that corners were precisely square. The pride they took in their work is still visible today in the precise fitting of stones and the subtle curves and angles that make Maya architecture so visually appealing. Meanwhile, in the residential areas spreading out from these ceremonial centers, daily life continued in patterns that would have been familiar to their ancestors. Women still rose before dawn to grind corn and prepare the day's meals. The sound of grinding stones, metates, would create a gentle percussion throughout the neighborhood as dozens of households prepared their morning tortillas. Children would help with simple tasks, learning adult skills through observation and gentle correction, rather than formal instruction. But now, there were specialists whose days followed different patterns. Skilled artisans would spend their mornings in workshops, carefully shaping obsidian blades, carving jade ornaments, or painting intricate designs on ceramic vessels. Their work required intense concentration and years of training, but it was performed at a relaxed, unhurried pace that emphasized quality over quantity. A master jade carver might spend weeks creating a single ornament, using techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen. Scribes worked in quiet rooms, carefully painting hieroglyphs on bark paper or carving them into stone monuments. Their days began with the preparation of their materials, grinding mineral pigments, mixing paints, preparing brushes from fine animal hairs, smoothing paper surfaces with polishing stones. The actual writing was meditative work, requiring steady hands and clear minds. Each glyph had to be perfectly formed, with precise proportions and carefully balanced compositions. A single inscriptional text might take many days to complete, with the scribe working only during the best light of mid-morning, when shadows were minimal and colors appeared truest. The marketplaces of these growing cities were centers of gentle commerce and social interaction. Merchants would spread their goods on woven mats, arranging items in pleasing displays that attracted customers through beauty as well as utility. The pace of commerce was relaxed and social, with buyers and sellers engaging in lengthy conversations about the quality of goods, the weather, family news, and community events. Bargaining was expected, but it followed polite conventions that maintained social harmony while allowing both parties to feel satisfied with their transactions. Market days brought people from surrounding communities, creating opportunities for news and social contact that helped bind the growing region together. Young people would meet potential marriage partners, elders would renew old friendships, and children would play traditional games while their parents conducted business. The market was as much a social institution as an economic one, helping to create the cultural unity that would become characteristic of Maya civilization. Religious life in these early cities was centered around increasingly elaborate ceremonies conducted at the growing temple complexes. These ceremonies followed ancient calendars that tracked the movements of sun, moon, and planets with remarkable precision. The Maya had developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge through generations of careful observation, noting the exact times of sunrise and sunset throughout the year, the phases of the moon, the apparent movement of planets against the background of stars. Their calendar systems were complex but logical, based on multiple interlocking cycles that allowed them to predict astronomical events far into the future. The basic calendar combined a 260-day sacred calendar with a 365-day solar calendar, creating a 52-year cycle called the calendar round. Within this system, every day had multiple names and associations, creating a rich framework for organizing religious ceremonies, agricultural activities, and civil administration. Religious ceremonies were community events that brought people together in shared spiritual experiences. The Maya believed that their gods required regular offerings and prayers to maintain the order of the universe, and these ceremonies were their way of participating in cosmic harmony. Incense made from copal resin would be burned in clay censers, creating sweet-smelling smoke that was believed to carry prayers to the heavens. Participants would often fast before important ceremonies, purifying their bodies and minds through controlled deprivation that heightened their spiritual awareness. During this period, the Maya began developing the practice of bloodletting as a form of religious offering. Kings and nobles would pierce their tongues, earlobes, or other parts of their bodies with obsidian blades or stingray spines, allowing their blood to drip onto bark paper that was then burned as an offering to the gods. This practice, while it might seem extreme to modern sensibilities, was performed in a ritualized, meditative context that emphasized spiritual communion rather than mere physical pain. The growing cities also saw the development of increasingly sophisticated ball courts, where the famous Maya ball game was played. These stone-paved courts were built with sloping walls and were often located near the main ceremonial plazas. The ball game itself was both sport and religious ritual, with players using their hips, shoulders, and elbows to keep a solid rubber ball in play. The games could last for hours, requiring tremendous endurance and skill from the players. The ball game had deep mythological significance for the Maya, representing the cosmic struggle between the forces of light and darkness, order and chaos. The movement of the ball around the court symbolized the movement of celestial bodies across the sky, and the outcome of games was believed to influence agricultural fertility, warfare, and other important community concerns. Like a garden reaching its full bloom after years of careful cultivation, Maya civilization achieved its greatest heights during what scholars call the Classic period, roughly from 250 to 900 CE. During these centuries, the gentle foundations laid by earlier generations supported an explosion of artistic achievement, architectural magnificence, and intellectual sophistication that would make the Maya one of the world's great ancient civilizations. The morning sun now rose over cities of unprecedented grandeur. Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, and dozens of other centers had grown into true urban complexes, with populations numbering in the tens of thousands. Yet despite their size and complexity, these cities maintained the peaceful rhythm of life that had characterized Maya culture from its earliest days. In Tikal, located deep in the rainforests of northern Guatemala, the daily routine began before dawn with the gentle stirring of tens of thousands of residents. The city stretched across nearly 600 square kilometers, with magnificent temple pyramids rising above the forest canopy like stone mountains reaching toward the sky. The tallest of these temples stood over 200 feet high, their steep stone steps climbing toward platforms where priests conducted the daily ceremonies that maintained cosmic harmony. The sound of the city awakening was a gentle symphony of daily life. Cooking fires were rekindled throughout the residential compounds, sending thin columns of smoke rising through the still air. The rhythmic grinding of corn on metates created a soft percussion that carried across the plazas and courtyards. Children's voices mixed with the calls of tropical birds as families began their morning routines. But Tikal during the Classic period was far more than just a larger version of earlier Maya communities. It had become the center of a complex political and economic system that extended across much of the Maya lowlands. The city's rulers, claiming divine authority through elaborate bloodline genealogies, coordinated trade networks, military campaigns, and construction projects that required the cooperation of hundreds of thousands of people across the region. The royal palace complex at Tikal was a masterpiece of Maya architecture and urban planning. Built around a series of courtyards connected by broad stairways and covered passages, it provided private residential areas for the royal family, while also including audience halls, administrative offices, and ceremonial spaces where the king could fulfill his various public roles. The construction techniques had been refined over centuries, with Maya architects learning to create stable multi-story buildings using corbelled arches and sophisticated weight distribution systems. Royal life followed ancient protocols that emphasized the sacred nature of kingship. The king's day began before sunrise with private rituals of purification and prayer. Attended by specially trained servants, he would bathe in scented water, dress in elaborate costumes that included jade ornaments, colorful feathers, and intricately woven textiles, and prepare his mind for the day's ceremonial obligations through meditation and consultation with court astronomers. Public audiences were carefully choreographed events that reinforced the social hierarchy while allowing subjects to petition for justice, present tribute, or receive royal favor. Visitors would approach the throne through a series of courtyards, each transition marking their increasing proximity to sacred royal authority. The king would sit motionless for hours, listening to petitions and delivering judgments with the measured cadence appropriate to his divine status. But even royal power operated within the gentle rhythms that characterized Maya society. Decisions were made through consultation with advisors, priests, and community leaders. Construction projects were planned to accommodate agricultural cycles, with major labor mobilizations scheduled for the dry season when farmers were available for other work. Military campaigns followed seasonal patterns, avoiding the rainy months when travel was difficult and focusing on periods when enemy cities were most vulnerable. In the residential areas spreading outward from these ceremonial centers, daily life continued in patterns that balanced tradition with innovation. Extended families lived in compounds arranged around central courtyards, with individual houses connected by covered walkways and shared spaces for cooking, crafts, and social activities. These compounds were largely self-sufficient, producing most of their own food, tools, and household goods while participating in the broader urban economy through specialized crafts or services. The Maya had developed sophisticated agricultural techniques that allowed them to support large urban populations without destroying their forest environment. They practiced intensive agriculture using raised fields in swampy areas, terraced hillsides to prevent erosion, and forest gardens that produced food while maintaining biodiversity. Their understanding of ecology was remarkably sophisticated, based on centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Raised field systems, called chenampas, were engineering marvels that converted swampy lowlands into highly productive agricultural areas. Maya engineers would dig networks of canals and use the excavated soil to build raised planting areas that were naturally irrigated by water from the canals. These systems were incredibly productive, capable of supporting several crops per year, while providing fish, waterfowl, and other aquatic resources from the canals themselves. The construction of these systems required massive coordinated labor, but it was organized in the same cooperative spirit that characterized other Maya community projects. Work crews would gather during the dry season, when water levels were low and the work was easier. The digging proceeded slowly and methodically, with workers using wooden digging sticks and stone tools to move soil and shape channels. The work was hard but social, with crews singing work songs and sharing meals together during rest periods. Forest gardens represented another innovation in Maya agriculture. Rather than completely clearing forest areas for farming, Maya agriculturalists learned to modify forest ecosystems to increase their productivity while maintaining their ecological stability. They would selectively remove less useful trees while encouraging the growth of fruit trees, nut trees, and other productive plants. The result was a managed landscape that appeared natural, but actually produced significantly more human food than unmodified forest. These forest gardens required intimate knowledge of plant ecology and growth patterns. Maya gardeners understood which plants grew well together, which trees provided the best shade for understory crops, how to encourage beneficial insects while discouraging pests. They knew the flowering seasons of different plants, the fruiting patterns of trees, the optimal times for pruning, planting, and harvesting. This knowledge was passed down through generations of practical experience, creating a sophisticated science of forest management that sustained large populations for centuries. Craft production during the Classic period reached extraordinary levels of sophistication. Maya artisans created works of art that remain unsurpassed for their technical skill and aesthetic beauty. Jade carvers produced ornaments of incredible delicacy, using techniques that allowed them to create complex, three-dimensional forms from some of the world's hardest stone. The work required infinite patience, with master carvers spending weeks or months on single pieces, using sand and water abrasives to slowly shape and polish their creations. Ceramic artists developed painting techniques that produced polychrome vessels decorated with complex mythological scenes and hieroglyphic texts. These painted ceramics were not merely functional objects, but works of narrative art that recorded historical events, religious beliefs, and courtly life with remarkable detail and artistry. The painting process required multiple firings and the application of mineral pigments in precise sequences, with each color requiring specific temperature and atmospheric conditions to achieve the desired effects. Maya textiles, unfortunately, have not survived in the archaeological record due to the humid tropical climate. But we know from artistic depictions and later historical accounts that Classic period weavers produced fabrics of extraordinary beauty and complexity. They worked with cotton, which they cultivated in carefully tended plots, and with fibers from various wild plants. Their looms were sophisticated devices that allowed the creation of complex patterns and color combinations that served as markers of social status and regional identity. The intellectual achievements of Classic period Maya were equally impressive. Their writing system had evolved into a fully functional script, capable of recording any thought or concept in their language. Maya scribes produced thousands of books on bark paper, recording historical accounts, religious texts, astronomical observations, and administrative records. Unfortunately, Spanish colonial authorities later destroyed most of these books, but the few that survive demonstrate the sophistication of Maya intellectual culture. Maya mathematics was remarkably advanced, including the concept of zero and positional notation that made complex calculations possible. Their astronomical observations were extraordinarily precise, with Maya astronomers tracking the movements of Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and other celestial bodies with an accuracy that rivals modern observations. They used this knowledge to create calendar systems that could predict eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and other astronomical events far into the future. In the soft light of early dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the forest floor and the first bird calls echoed through the trees, Maya warriors would begin their careful preparations for battle. Warfare was an integral part of Classic period Maya civilization, but it followed ritualized patterns that emphasized honor, divine sanction, and the capture of prestigious prisoners, rather than simple territorial conquest or resource acquisition. The Maya approach to warfare was deeply spiritual, governed by astronomical calculations and religious ceremonies that determined the proper timing and methods for military campaigns. Wars were not launched impulsively or for purely political reasons, but were planned months or even years in advance, with court astronomers consulting complex calendars to identify the most auspicious dates for different types of military action. Preparation for warfare began with purification rituals that could last for days or weeks. Warriors would fast abstain from sexual relations, and participate in sweat bath ceremonies designed to cleanse their bodies and minds for the sacred task ahead. They would make offerings to war gods, seeking divine favor and protection in the coming battles. These rituals were performed with the same meditative attention to detail that characterized all Maya religious practices. The manufacture of weapons and armor was a specialized craft requiring years of training and experience. Maya weapons were primarily made from organic materials, wood, bone, and obsidian, that have not survived well in the archaeological record, but contemporary artistic depictions show that they were both effective and beautiful. Spears were tipped with razor-sharp obsidian points that could penetrate even thick cotton armor. Clubs were embedded with obsidian blades that created devastating slashing wounds. Obsidian weapon production was a remarkable technical achievement. Master craftsmen could create blades sharper than modern surgical steel by carefully controlling the fracture patterns in the volcanic glass. The process required intimate knowledge of stone fracture mechanics and exceptional manual dexterity. A single large obsidian core could yield hundreds of sharp blades, but only in the hands of a truly skilled craftsman. Apprentices spent years learning to read the grain of the stone, to position their tools correctly, and to apply just the right amount of pressure to achieve clean, sharp breaks. Maya armor was made primarily from thick cotton padding that was surprisingly effective against obsidian weapons. These cotton suits, called itkahuipili, were made by quilting multiple layers of cotton batting between outer shells of tightly woven fabric. The result was armor that was flexible enough to allow free movement while providing substantial protection against cuts and thrusts. The armor was often decorated with feathers and jade ornaments that identified the wearer's rank and achievements. Military campaigns followed seasonal patterns that accommodated agricultural cycles and weather conditions. Most warfare took place during the dry season, when travel was easier, and warriors were available for extended campaigns away from their home communities. The wet season was typically a time of truce, when armies returned home to tend their crops and participate in agricultural ceremonies. Maya armies were relatively small by the standards of other ancient civilizations, typically numbering in the hundreds or low thousands, rather than tens of thousands. This was partly because Maya warfare emphasized the capture of high-ranking prisoners, rather than the complete destruction of enemy forces. A successful raid that captured a dozen noble prisoners was considered more valuable than a battle that killed hundreds of common soldiers. The march to battle was a ceremonial procession as much as a military movement. Warriors would paint their bodies with designs that invoked divine protection and identified their home communities. They carried banners and musical instruments that announced their presence and maintained unit cohesion. The pace was deliberate rather than hurried, allowing time for proper reconnaissance and spiritual preparation. Maya battle tactics emphasized stealth, surprise, and the psychological impact of sudden, overwhelming force. Rather than engaging in prolonged siege warfare, Maya armies preferred to strike quickly at dawn or dusk, when visibility was poor and enemy sentries might be less alert. They used the forest environment to their advantage, approaching target communities through covered routes and establishing ambush positions along escape routes. The actual fighting, when it occurred, was fierce but brief. Maya warriors sought to demonstrate individual prowess while working together to achieve tactical objectives. Combat was primarily hand-to-hand, with warriors attempting to wound and capture opponents rather than kill them outright. The most prestigious achievement was the capture of enemy nobles, especially rulers or members of royal families who would be taken back to the victorious city for elaborate sacrifice ceremonies. These capture techniques required considerable skill and courage. A warrior had to disable his opponent without killing him, then successfully transport a struggling prisoner across potentially hostile territory back to his home city. Many warriors specialized in particular capture techniques, using nets, lassos, or specialized clubs designed to stun rather than kill. The most elite warriors could capture multiple prisoners in a single battle, a feat that brought tremendous personal prestige and material rewards. However, it's important to understand that Maya warfare, despite its ritual aspects, could be devastatingly effective. Archaeological evidence shows that some cities were completely destroyed, their populations killed or dispersed, their monuments defaced, and their territories absorbed by conquering rivals. The ritualized nature of Maya warfare did not make it less deadly or destructive, but rather provided a cultural framework for understanding and justifying the violence that was an inevitable part of political competition. The treatment of prisoners captured in warfare varied, depending on their social status and the specific circumstances of their capture. Common soldiers might be enslaved or sacrificed in relatively simple ceremonies, but high-ranking captives were reserved for elaborate public rituals that could last for days or weeks. These ceremonies served multiple purposes. They honored the gods who had granted victory. They demonstrated the power and prestige of the victorious ruler, and they provided opportunities for the community to participate in sacred drama that reinforced social cohesion and cultural values. The most important prisoners, enemy rulers or members of royal families, were often kept alive for months or years before their final sacrifice, during which time they might be forced to participate in ball games, ceremonial dances, or other public performances that humiliated them while entertaining their captors. These prolonged captivities were documented in Maya art and inscriptions, which show prisoners in various states of preparation for sacrifice, often bearing the physical marks of their extended suffering. Sacrifice itself was performed according to ancient protocols that transformed violence into sacred ritual. The methods varied depending on the occasion and the status of the victims, but all emphasized the transformation of human life into spiritual energy that could nourish the gods and maintain cosmic order. Heart extraction was perhaps the most common method, performed by priests using obsidian knives to make precise incisions that allowed the heart to be removed while still beating. These ceremonies took place in temple complexes, designed specifically for ritual purposes, with stone altars positioned to allow maximum visibility for spectators while maintaining the sacred character of the proceedings. Participants would prepare for days through fasting, purification, and meditation. The actual sacrifice was preceded by elaborate rituals that might include music, dancing, incense burning, and the recitation of sacred texts. Other forms of sacrifice included drowning in sacred cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with water, burning, flaying, and various forms of bloodletting. Archaeological investigations of cenotes have revealed the remains of sacrificed individuals along with precious offerings of jade, gold, and ceramic vessels. These underwater caves were considered portals to the underworld, and objects thrown into them were believed to reach the gods directly. The Maya also practiced auto-sacrifice, or self-bloodletting, as a form of religious devotion that did not necessarily result in death. Kings, nobles, and priests would pierce various parts of their bodies, tongues, earlobes, genitals, with obsidian blades or stingray spines, allowing their blood to drip onto bark paper that was then burned as an offering. These bloodletting ceremonies were performed during important calendar dates and were believed to open communication channels between the human and divine worlds. Perhaps most remarkably, Maya sacrifice was often voluntary, particularly among the nobility. Historical accounts describe rulers who offered themselves for sacrifice during times of crisis, believing that their deaths would appease angry gods and save their people from disaster. These voluntary sacrifices were considered the ultimate expression of noble duty and religious devotion, and they were commemorated in art and literature as examples of ideal behavior. The psychological and social functions of Maya sacrifice were complex and multifaceted. These rituals provided mechanisms for processing collective trauma, channeling social tensions, and reinforcing hierarchical relationships. They created shared experiences that bound communities together, while also demonstrating the power of rulers and priests. Most importantly, from the Maya perspective, they maintained the cosmic order that ensured agricultural fertility, military success, and general social well-being. As the morning sun climbs higher in the cloudless sky, casting sharp shadows across the abandoned plazas and empty temples, we encounter one of the most intriguing mysteries in all of human history: the collapse of classic Maya civilization. Like the gradual fading of daylight into dusk, the great Maya cities of the classic period slowly emptied during the 8th and 9th centuries CE, their magnificent temples falling silent, their busy marketplaces growing still, their sophisticated courts dissolving into memory. This transformation was not a sudden catastrophe, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over several generations, as subtle as the imperceptible changes that occur as seasons slowly shift from one to another. In some cities, the change began as early as 750 CE, while in others, traditional life continued for another century or more. The process was like watching a great tree slowly die, with some branches withering first, while others continued to produce leaves for years. Copan, the magnificent city in what is now Honduras, provides one of the clearest examples of this gradual decline. During the early 8th century, Copan was at the height of its power and prosperity. Its skilled astronomers were making sophisticated celestial observations from their carefully aligned observatories. Its scribes were carving some of the finest hieroglyphic inscriptions in all of Maya history. Its artists were creating sculptures of unprecedented beauty and technical sophistication. The daily life in Copan during this final flowering continued to follow the peaceful patterns that had characterized Maya civilization for centuries. Each morning brought the familiar sounds of cooking fires being rekindled, corn being ground on stone metats, children playing in courtyards while their parents prepared for the day's work. Craftsmen still gathered in their workshops to continue their patient labor on jade ornaments, ceramic vessels, and obsidian tools. Farmers still tended their terraced fields in the surrounding hills, carefully maintaining the agricultural systems that had sustained the city for generations. But subtle changes were beginning to appear in the archaeological record. The quality of construction in new buildings began to decline slightly, with less attention paid to the precise fitting of stones and the elegant proportions that had characterized earlier Maya architecture. Some construction projects were abandoned before completion, their unfinished walls standing as monuments to interrupted ambition. Fewer elaborate carved monuments were erected, and those that were created often showed signs of haste or reduced skill in their execution. The royal court continued to function, but with increasing signs of stress and difficulty. Kings continued to perform their ceremonial duties, but their inscriptions began to emphasize warfare and conflict more heavily than in earlier periods. The elegant poetry and philosophical reflections that had characterized earlier royal texts were replaced by starker accounts of military campaigns and territorial disputes. It was as if the Maya elites sensed approaching difficulties and were focusing their attention on more immediate, practical concerns. Population studies suggest that the cities were becoming increasingly crowded during this period, with more people packed into the same residential areas and new settlements spreading into marginal agricultural lands. The agricultural systems that had sustained Maya civilization for centuries were being pushed to their limits, with farmers clearing steeper hillsides and attempting to cultivate areas that were less suitable for intensive agriculture. Environmental evidence suggests that the Maya were experiencing increasing ecological stress during this period. Deforestation was accelerating as growing populations needed more agricultural land and more wood for construction and fuel. Soil erosion was increasing as forest cover was removed from steep hillsides. Some areas show evidence of salinization, suggesting that intensive irrigation was beginning to damage soil quality. Climate data from lake sediments and other sources indicate that this was also a period of increasing environmental challenge. The region experienced several severe droughts during the 8th and 9th centuries, with some lasting for decades. Rainfall became more erratic and unpredictable, making agricultural planning more difficult and reducing crop yields in many areas. Rivers and streams that had flowed reliably for centuries began to dry up during drought years, forcing communities to rely on stored water or to relocate to areas with more reliable water sources. The Maya response to these challenges followed predictable cultural patterns. Communities increased their religious observances, seeking divine intervention to end the droughts and restore normal weather patterns. More elaborate ceremonies were conducted, with increased offerings of precious goods and human sacrifice. Archaeological evidence shows increased deposition of valuable objects in sacred cenotes during this period, suggesting desperate attempts to appease angry or distant gods. Political responses were equally predictable, but ultimately counterproductive. Rulers launched more frequent military campaigns against their neighbors, seeking to capture resources and populations that might offset their own territory's declining productivity. These wars created additional pressures on agricultural systems, as farmers were conscripted for military service during crucial planting and harvesting seasons. The increased warfare also disrupted trade networks that had sustained Maya civilization for centuries. Merchants could no longer travel safely between cities, reducing the flow of obsidian, jade, cacao, and other goods that had allowed communities to specialize in particular products. Local economies became more isolated and less efficient, forcing each community to become more self-sufficient at precisely the time when environmental challenges were making self-sufficiency more difficult. The social fabric of Maya society began to show signs of strain as well. Archaeological evidence suggests increasing inequality during this period, with elite residences becoming more elaborate, while commoner housing showed signs of overcrowding and declining living standards. This growing disparity may have undermined the social cooperation that had been essential to Maya agricultural and construction projects. Religious authority, which had provided stability and legitimacy to Maya rulers for centuries, appears to have been challenged as traditional ceremonies failed to restore favorable weather conditions. When royal rituals and priestly interventions could not end the droughts or restore agricultural productivity, people may have begun to question the divine mandate of their leaders. This loss of legitimacy would have made it even more difficult for rulers to organize the cooperative labor that was essential for maintaining complex agricultural systems and urban infrastructure. The abandonment process itself was gradual and varied from city to city. In some places, elite families appear to have departed first, leaving behind populations of commoners who continued to live in the urban centers for decades, but without the resources or organization to maintain the elaborate ceremonial complexes. Temples and palaces gradually fell into disrepair, their painted stucco facades cracking and fading, their wooden roof structures rotting away in the humid tropical climate. Other cities show evidence of more rapid abandonment, with entire populations apparently relocating within a generation or less. These mass departures left behind fully equipped households with ceramic vessels still sitting on shelves, tools abandoned in workshops, and half-finished construction projects standing as silent testimony to interrupted lives. The silence that settled over these places was profound. No more grinding of corn on metates, no more laughter of children in courtyards, no more chanting of prayers in temple chambers. Some populations moved northward into the Yucatan Peninsula, where environmental conditions were somewhat different, and where new cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan would arise during the following post-classic period. These migrations required tremendous adjustment, as people adapted to new landscapes, new water sources, and new economic opportunities. The cultural continuity was maintained through language, religious beliefs, and craft traditions, but the specific forms of classic Maya civilization were gradually transformed or abandoned. The process was not uniform across the Maya region. Some cities in the northern Yucatan actually experienced population growth during the 9th and 10th centuries, as refugees from the collapsing southern cities brought their skills and knowledge to new locations. The transition was like a stream dividing around a boulder, with the cultural current continuing, but in new channels and with altered characteristics. Archaeological investigations of this period reveal poignant details of daily life during the collapse. Refuse deposits from the final occupation phases show evidence of dietary stress, with people eating foods that had not been part of their traditional cuisine and grinding bones to extract every possible nutrient. Tool assemblages become simpler and more expedient, suggesting that the specialized craft production systems that had characterized the classic period were breaking down. The final dated monuments in many cities cluster around the late 9th century, with the last known Maya long count date corresponding to 909 CE. After this point, the tradition of erecting carved stone monuments commemorating royal achievements simply ended in most areas. It was as if Maya civilization had lost the collective confidence and resources necessary to project its achievements into the future through permanent stone records. But even as the great cities emptied and their monuments fell silent, Maya people did not disappear. Rural populations continued to live in the region, maintaining traditional agricultural practices and local religious observances. Their descendants are still there today, speaking Maya languages and preserving ancient traditions that connect them to their classic period ancestors. The collapse was a transformation rather than an extinction, a profound change in the scale and complexity of Maya society, rather than its complete disappearance. like the first tentative green shoots that emerge from forest soil after a fire has cleared the old growth. Maya civilization began to regenerate in new forms during the post-classic period, roughly from 900 to 1500 CE. While the great southern cities lay abandoned, their temples slowly being reclaimed by the advancing jungle, new centers of Maya culture arose in the northern Yucatan Peninsula and the highland regions of Guatemala. The morning light now fell on different landscapes and different architectural styles, but the fundamental rhythms of Maya life continued much as they had for centuries. Families still rose before dawn to prepare corn tortillas on stone griddles. Farmers still tended their plots of corn, beans, and squash using agricultural techniques perfected by their ancestors. Craftsmen still worked with patient skill to create beautiful objects from jade, obsidian, and ceramic clay. Chichen Itza emerged as the most prominent of these new centers. Its distinctive architecture reflecting both traditional Maya elements and influences from central Mexican cultures. The famous pyramid, known as El Castillo, rose from the center of a vast plaza, its steep steps climbing toward a temple platform where priests continued to conduct the ancient ceremonies that maintained cosmic harmony. But the style was different from classic period architecture, with cleaner lines, larger internal spaces, and decorative motifs that showed the influence of new cultural contacts. Daily life in Chichen Itza followed patterns that would have been familiar to residents of classic period cities, but with some important innovations. The city was organized around a great ball court, larger than any that had been built during the classic period, where ritual games continued to reenact cosmic dramas through athletic competition. These games had evolved to incorporate new rules and meanings, reflecting the cultural synthesis that characterized post-classic Maya civilization. The famous sacred cenote at Chichen Itza became one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in all of Mesoamerica during this period. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles to participate in ceremonies at this natural well, which the Maya believed provided direct access to the underwater realm of their rain god. The morning mist that rose from the cenote's dark waters was seen as visible evidence of divine presence, and offerings thrown into its depths were believed to reach the gods directly. Archaeological dredging of the sacred cenote has revealed thousands of offerings deposited over centuries of ritual activity. Jade ornaments, gold discs, ceramic vessels, copal incense, and the remains of sacrificed individuals. The variety and richness of these offerings demonstrate the international importance of Chichen Itza as a religious center, with pilgrims bringing precious goods from across Mesoamerica to honor the deities of this sacred place. Trade networks during the post-classic period became even more extensive than they had been during the classic period, connecting Maya communities with cultures as distant as central Mexico and lower Central America. Large ocean-going canoes traveled along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts, carrying cacao, obsidian, jade, feathers, and other goods between distant communities. These trading voyages were major undertakings that required careful planning, skilled navigation, and diplomatic agreements with communities along the routes. The merchants who organized these trading expeditions were often wealthy and powerful individuals who combined commercial success with political influence. They traveled with armed escorts and diplomatic credentials that allowed them to pass through the territories of potentially hostile neighbors. Their arrival in distant communities was an occasion for elaborate ceremonies and feast, as local leaders sought to maintain good relationships with these important intermediaries. Maya maritime technology during this period was sophisticated and well adapted to coastal navigation. Their large canoes, carved from single cecropia or mahogany trees, could carry dozens of passengers and substantial cargoes. They were equipped with cotton sails for efficient travel when wind conditions were favorable, but could also be paddled when necessary. The construction of these vessels required considerable skill and cooperation, with specialized boat builders working for months to shape and finish each canoe. Navigation techniques combined practical seamanship with sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Maya navigators used the positions of stars, the patterns of winds and currents, the behavior of seabirds, and other natural indicators to find their way across open water. They created mental maps of coastlines that were remarkably accurate, allowing them to locate safe harbors, fresh water sources, and dangerous reefs even in unfamiliar areas. The highland Maya regions experienced their own renaissance during the post-classic period, with cities like Utatlan and Iximche becoming centers of powerful kingdoms that controlled trade routes between the Pacific coast and the interior. These highland communities developed distinctive architectural styles that adapted traditional Maya design principles to mountainous environments and different building materials. Highland Maya society was organized around powerful lineage groups that traced their ancestry back to legendary founders and maintained elaborate genealogies that served as charters for political authority. These lineage histories were preserved in books written on bark paper and in oral traditions that were recited during important ceremonies. The stories combined historical information with mythological themes, creating narratives that explained the origins of particular communities and their relationships to neighboring groups. Military organization in highland Maya communities was more centralized than it had been during the classic period, with warrior societies that trained young men in specialized combat techniques and provided them with distinctive weapons and insignia. These military orders were closely associated with particular deities and maintained their own ceremonial calendars and ritual obligations. The famous Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiché Maya, was compiled during this period and provides remarkable insight into post-classic Maya religious beliefs and cultural values. This text, which combines creation mythology with historical narrative, describes the adventures of the hero twins as they struggle against the lords of the underworld and ultimately triumph through cleverness, cooperation, and divine assistance. The creation story in the Popol Vuh reflects sophisticated Maya understanding of agricultural processes and human development. The gods attempt several times to create suitable human beings. First, making people from clay who dissolve in water, then from wood who lack souls and consciousness. Finally, they create people from corn dough, producing beings who are intelligent and grateful, but perhaps too perfect for their own good. The gods have to limit human vision and knowledge to prevent these corn people from becoming rivals to divine authority. Religious practices during the post-classic period continued many classic period traditions, but with some important innovations. Feathered serpent deities became more prominent, reflecting increased contact with Central Mexican cultures, where these gods played important roles. Ceremonies involving the burning of copal incense became more elaborate, with priests using specially designed censers that created complex patterns of smoke believed to carry prayers to specific deities. The calendar systems that had been developed during the classic period continued to be used, but were supplemented with new divinatory techniques and astronomical observations. Maya priests maintained detailed records of planetary movements and used this information to predict favorable times for agricultural activities, religious ceremonies, and political decisions. Their astronomical knowledge was remarkably sophisticated, with calculations of planetary cycles that were more accurate than those available to European astronomers of the same period. Markets during the post-classic period became even more important than they had been during earlier periods, serving not only as centers of commerce, but as focal points for social interaction and cultural exchange. Market days brought together people from diverse communities, creating opportunities for young people to meet potential marriage partners, for craftsmen to share technical innovations, and for communities to maintain diplomatic relationships through ceremonial exchanges of gifts. The variety of goods available in post-classic markets was extraordinary, reflecting the extensive trade networks that connected Maya communities with cultures throughout Mesoamerica and beyond. Cacao beans served as a standard medium of exchange, but markets also operated through barter systems that allowed people to trade surplus agricultural products for manufactured goods, raw materials for finished objects, and local specialties for exotic imports from distant regions. As the morning mist slowly lifts from the coastal waters of the Yucatan Peninsula, revealing the vast blue expanse of the Caribbean Sea, we arrive at one of the most dramatic and tragic transitions in all of human history. In the early years of the 16th century, European sailing ships appeared on the horizon like strange white clouds, bringing with them forces that would transform the Maya world forever. The first Spanish expeditions reached Maya territories in 1511, when survivors of a shipwreck washed ashore on the coast of Yucatan. These castaways were captured by local Maya communities and experienced firsthand the sophisticated civilization that Europeans would soon attempt to destroy. Some of these early contacts were peaceful, with Maya leaders treating the strangers as honored guests and attempting to understand their origins and intentions through careful questioning and observation. Hernando Cortés landed on the Yucatan coast in 1519, beginning a series of encounters that would gradually bring Spanish colonial authority to Maya territories. But unlike the rapid conquest of the Aztec Empire in central Mexico, the Spanish subjugation of the Maya world was a slow and difficult process that took over 150 years to complete. The decentralized nature of Maya political organization, combined with their intimate knowledge of local geography and their sophisticated military traditions, allowed many Maya communities to maintain their independence for generations after first European contact. The daily life of Maya communities during the early contact period continued to follow ancient patterns, but with increasing awareness of the profound changes that were beginning to affect their world. Villages still awakened each morning to the familiar sounds of cooking fires and grinding corn, but now there were also new concerns to discuss around evening hearths. Reports from travelers about strange men with pale skin and metal weapons, stories of cities destroyed by new diseases, news of traditional leaders who had converted to a foreign religion. Maya leaders attempted to understand these developments within their existing cultural frameworks. They consulted their books and their calendar specialists, seeking astronomical explanations for the arrival of these strange visitors. Some interpreted European contact as fulfillment of ancient prophecies about the return of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity who had once ruled over Maya communities and promised to return in times of great change. The Spanish conquistadors were astonished by what they found in Maya territories. Their written accounts describe cities with magnificent stone architecture, sophisticated agricultural systems, and complex social organization that rivaled anything they had known in Europe. They were particularly impressed by Maya books, recognizing immediately that they were dealing with a literate civilization that had preserved extensive written records of its history and knowledge. Unfortunately, Spanish colonial policy toward Maya culture was systematically destructive. Catholic missionaries, believing that Maya books contained demonic influences, organized massive book-burning ceremonies that destroyed thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and literature. Only 4 Maya codices survived this cultural catastrophe, providing tantalizingly brief glimpses of what must have been a vast literary tradition. The Spanish conquest of Maya territories was facilitated by several factors beyond superior military technology. European diseases, particularly smallpox, measles, and typhus, devastated Maya populations that had no immunity to these infections. Entire communities were wiped out within months of first exposure, creating demographic collapse that made organized resistance increasingly difficult. The Spanish also exploited existing political divisions within Maya society, forming alliances with some communities against their traditional enemies. This strategy had been successful in the conquest of central Mexico, where Cortés had allied with enemies of the Aztec Empire. In the Maya region, Spanish commanders formed similar alliances, using Maya warriors and local knowledge to defeat other Maya groups that resisted Spanish authority. Religious conversion became a central focus of Spanish colonial policy, but Maya responses to Christianity were complex and varied. Some communities embraced the new religion, finding parallels between Christian and traditional Maya beliefs that made conversion relatively comfortable. Others maintained their traditional practices in secret, while appearing to accept Christianity for political reasons. Still others attempted to synthesize Christian and Maya elements into new religious systems that preserved essential cultural values while adapting to colonial requirements. The famous Maya leader Tecún Umán led the Quiché resistance against Spanish forces in the Guatemalan highlands, becoming a symbol of Maya courage and determination that continues to inspire people today. According to traditional accounts, Tecún Umán fought Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado in single combat, using traditional Maya weapons and battle tactics against Spanish armor and horses. Although he was ultimately killed in this encounter, his bravery and sacrifice became legendary throughout the Maya region. Daily life under Spanish colonial rule involved numerous adaptations and compromises. Maya communities were reorganized into new settlement patterns that concentrated populations in towns centered around Catholic churches. Traditional agricultural practices continued, but with the addition of European crops and livestock that gradually changed Maya diets and farming systems. Spanish colonial administrators imposed tribute requirements that forced Maya communities to produce surplus goods for export to European markets. The encomienda system granted Spanish colonists control over Maya labor and tribute, creating a form of feudalism that exploited indigenous communities while providing profits for European settlers. Maya people were forced to work in Spanish enterprises, mines, plantations, construction projects that took them away from their traditional occupations and community obligations. This labor draft system undermined traditional Maya social organization and made it difficult for communities to maintain their cultural practices. Despite these pressures, Maya culture showed remarkable resilience and adaptability. Traditional knowledge was preserved through oral traditions passed down within families and communities. Religious practices continued in modified forms, with Maya ceremonies often conducted in conjunction with Catholic festivals that occurred at similar times of year. Traditional crafts continued to be practiced, though often adapted to produce goods desired by Spanish markets. the caste war of Yucatan, which began in 1847 and continued intermittently until 1901, demonstrated the enduring strength of Maya cultural identity and political organization. Maya communities that had been subjugated for over 3 centuries rose in coordinated rebellion against Mexican national authority, succeeding in establishing independent Maya territories that controlled much of the Yucatan Peninsula for over half a century. This remarkable conflict began with grievances over land rights, taxation, and cultural persecution, but quickly evolved into a comprehensive attempt to restore Maya political independence and cultural autonomy. Maya leaders drew on traditional forms of military organization, religious authority, and community cooperation to create effective resistance movements that Mexican federal forces found extremely difficult to defeat. The rebel Maya established their own government, complete with military commanders, civil administrators, and religious leaders who combined traditional Maya practices with selected elements of Mexican and international political organization. They maintained diplomatic relations with British colonial authorities in neighboring Belize, traded with foreign merchants, and created educational systems that taught traditional Maya knowledge alongside modern technical skills. The gradual end of Maya resistance came not through military defeat, but through demographic and economic changes that made traditional ways of life increasingly difficult to maintain. Railroad construction opened previously isolated regions to outside influence, while new economic opportunities drew young Maya people away from traditional communities toward wage labor in growing cities. The resilience of Maya culture during this long period of challenge and change demonstrates the fundamental strength of cultural traditions that had been developing for over 3,000 years. Despite conquest, disease, forced conversion, economic exploitation, and political persecution, Maya communities maintained core elements of their traditional worldview, their social organization, and their relationship with their ancestral landscapes. Today, millions of people in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador continue to speak Maya languages, practice traditional agricultural techniques, weave traditional textiles, and maintain religious beliefs that connect them directly to their ancient ancestors. Their persistence represents one of humanity's great cultural achievements, the maintenance of indigenous identity and knowledge systems despite centuries of pressure to abandon them. As the soft light of dawn illuminates the misty highlands of Guatemala and the coastal plains of Yucatan, we find that the story of the Maya people did not end with Spanish conquest or modern political changes. Like a river that continues to flow despite obstacles and diversions, Maya culture has persisted through 5 centuries of dramatic change, adapting and evolving while maintaining essential connections to ancestral traditions and knowledge. The morning routine in contemporary Maya communities still begins much as it has for centuries. Women rise before dawn to rekindle cooking fires and prepare the day's supply of tortillas, grinding corn on stone metates that differ little from those used by their ancestors 1,000 years ago. The rhythmic sound of grinding creates the same gentle percussion that has marked the beginning of Maya days for millennia, connecting modern families directly to the deep traditions of their culture. Children in these communities grow up bilingual, learning traditional Maya languages at home, while also mastering Spanish for school and interaction with the broader national societies in which they live. This linguistic duality reflects the broader challenge of maintaining traditional culture while participating in modern economic and political systems that often demand cultural assimilation as the price of advancement. Traditional agriculture continues to play a central role in Maya community life, but it now coexists with modern farming techniques and market pressures that have transformed rural economies throughout the region. Many Maya farmers continue to practice milpa agriculture, the traditional corn, bean, squash polyculture that has sustained their people for centuries. But they may also grow cash crops for national and international markets, using modern fertilizers and pesticides alongside traditional ecological knowledge. The integration of old and new is particularly evident in Maya textile production, which remains one of the most visible markers of cultural identity. Maya women continue to weave on traditional backstrap looms, creating huipals and other garments that identify their specific communities through distinctive patterns and color combinations. But they may also use synthetic threads and chemical dyes alongside traditional cotton and natural colorants, and they may sell their products in urban markets or even international trade networks. Religious life in modern Maya communities reflects similar patterns of synthesis and adaptation. Most Maya people today are nominally Catholic, but their practice of Christianity incorporates numerous traditional elements that create distinctively Maya forms of Catholic worship. Traditional calendar ceremonies continue to be observed, often in conjunction with Catholic feast days that occur at similar times. Traditional spiritual leaders, known as daykeepers or AJQH, continue to conduct ceremonies based on the ancient 260-day calendar, providing spiritual guidance and healing services that complement rather than compete with Catholic practices. The famous pilgrimage to Chichicastenango in Guatemala demonstrates this religious synthesis beautifully. Every Thursday and Sunday, thousands of Maya people gather at the Catholic Church in this highland town to participate in ceremonies that combine Catholic and traditional elements in seamless unity. Incense burns on the church steps as traditional prayers are offered in Maya languages, while inside the church, Catholic masses are conducted in Spanish. The two traditions coexist peacefully, each contributing to a rich spiritual life that satisfies both ancient and modern needs. Educational systems in Maya regions face particular challenges as they attempt to serve indigenous communities, while also preparing students for participation in national societies. Traditional Maya knowledge about agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and social organization is not typically included in official curricula, creating a gap between school learning and community knowledge that can alienate young people from their cultural heritage. However, recent decades have seen increasing recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge and the importance of bilingual education that respects cultural diversity. Some schools now teach traditional Maya calendar systems alongside the Gregorian calendar, traditional ecological knowledge alongside modern science, and traditional oral literature alongside national literatures written in Spanish. Maya communities have also become increasingly involved in international movements for indigenous rights and environmental protection. Their traditional ecological knowledge is now recognized as valuable for sustainable development projects, and their political organizations have gained influence in national and international forums where indigenous rights are discussed. The modern Maya political movement draws strength from traditional forms of community organization, while also employing modern strategies of political mobilization and international advocacy. Maya leaders have learned to use mass media, international law, and global networks of indigenous solidarity to advance their communities' interests and protect their cultural heritage. Archaeological research in Maya regions has evolved from purely academic investigation to collaborative projects that involve Maya communities as partners, rather than simply as subjects of study. Many Maya people have become trained archaeologists and are now leading research projects in their own ancestral territories, bringing traditional knowledge and cultural perspectives to the interpretation of ancient sites. The tourist industry that has developed around Maya archaeological sites creates both opportunities and challenges for modern Maya communities. While tourism provides economic benefits and raises international awareness of Maya culture, it also tends to present Maya civilization as something ancient and exotic, rather than as a living culture that continues to evolve and adapt. Maya communities are increasingly asserting control over how their culture is presented to outsiders, developing community-based tourism projects that provide economic benefits while also educating visitors about contemporary Maya life. These projects often include opportunities for visitors to participate in traditional activities like textile weaving, traditional cooking, or agricultural practices, creating authentic cultural exchanges that benefit both Maya communities and their guests. Language revitalization has become a particular focus of Maya cultural preservation efforts. While millions of people continue to speak Maya languages, the dominance of Spanish in education, government, and commerce creates pressure for young people to abandon their ancestral languages in favor of more economically advantageous linguistic skills. Maya intellectuals and educators are developing new materials and methods for teaching Maya languages, creating dictionaries, grammars, and literature that demonstrate the sophistication and beauty of these ancient linguistic traditions. The revival of traditional Maya mathematics and astronomy has also gained momentum in recent years, with Maya scholars working to document and teach traditional knowledge systems that were nearly lost during the colonial period. These efforts have revealed the remarkable sophistication of Maya intellectual achievements and have contributed to growing pride in Maya cultural heritage among young people who might otherwise feel pressure to abandon their traditional identities. Modern Maya artists continue to create works that reflect both traditional themes and contemporary concerns, using both ancient and modern techniques to express the ongoing vitality of Maya culture. Maya writers are producing novels, poetry, and other literature in Maya languages, creating new forms of artistic expression that demonstrate the continued creativity and intellectual vigor of Maya communities. As the morning sun rises higher in the sky, illuminating both ancient temples and modern communities, we can see that the Maya story continues to unfold. The great cities of the classic period may lie in ruins, overgrown by jungle vegetation, but the people who created them continue to live, work, and dream in the same landscapes, where their ancestors developed one of humanity's great civilizations. Their persistence represents hope for all of humanity's diverse cultures, demonstrating that traditional knowledge and ways of life can adapt and survive even in the face of tremendous pressures for change and assimilation. The Maya example shows us that cultural diversity is not only possible, but essential for creating a world that honors both human creativity and environmental sustainability. As our gentle journey through Maya history draws to a close, like the soft fading of daylight into peaceful evening, we can reflect on the remarkable story we have shared together. For over 3,000 years, Maya people have inhabited the forests, mountains, and coasts of Mesoamerica, creating and maintaining one of humanity's great civilizations through countless generations of patient work, careful observation, and cultural creativity. We have walked together through their daily routines, observing the quiet rhythms of agricultural life that sustained millions of people while leaving their environment richer rather than poorer. We have witnessed the gradual development of their cities, their art, their writing, their scientific knowledge, and their spiritual traditions. We have seen how they faced challenges and changes with resilience and adaptability, maintaining their essential cultural values while evolving to meet new circumstances. Their story reminds us that human civilizations are not static monuments, but living, growing, changing communities of people who must constantly adapt to new conditions while preserving the knowledge and values that give their lives meaning. The Maya achievement lies not only in their magnificent architecture and sophisticated intellectual accomplishments, but in their ability to maintain cultural continuity across centuries of change. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you the peaceful image of Maya families beginning their day with the ancient ritual of grinding corn, the sound connecting them across time to countless generations of ancestors and descendants. Let the gentle rhythm of their daily life calm your mind and ease your transition into restorative sleep. The stars that shine down on you tonight are the same stars that Maya astronomers observed and recorded with such careful precision. The cycles of sleeping and waking, of seasons changing, of communities working together to create meaning and beauty. These rhythms continue as they always have, connecting us all to the deep patterns that govern life on our beautiful planet. Rest peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the forests and highlands of Mesoamerica, Maya people are settling into sleep just as you are. Their children listening to ancient stories told in voices that echo across the centuries. Their dreams and yours join together in the universal human experience of seeking understanding, meaning, and connection across time and space. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle sounds of tropical rain on broad leaves, the soft rustling of wind in ancient cecropia trees, and the quiet satisfaction of communities living in harmony with their environment and their cultural heritage. The Maya story continues, as all good stories do, in the dreams and hopes of those who remember and honor the wisdom of the past while building toward a more beautiful future. Sweet dreams, dear listeners. Until we meet again on another journey through history's gentle pathways, may you rest in peace and wake refreshed, carrying with you the calm strength and patient wisdom of the remarkable Maya people.